Relax and listen to the voice. The Drummer. A young drummer went out quite alone one evening into the country, and came to a lake on the shore, of which he perceived lying there 3 pieces of white linen. "What fine linen," said he, and put 1 piece in his pocket. He returned home, thought no more of what he had found, and went to bed. Just as he was going to sleep, it seemed to him as if someone was calling his name. He listened, and he was aware of a soft voice which cried to him, "Drummer! Drummer! Wake up!" As it was a dark night, he could see no one, but it appeared to him that a figure was hovering about his bed. "What do you want?" he asked. "Give me back my shift," answered the voice, "that you took away from me last evening by the lake." "You shall have it back again," said the drummer, "if you will tell me who you are." "Ah," replied the voice, "I am the daughter of a mighty king, but I have fallen into the power of a witch, and am shut up on the glass mountain. I have to bathe in the lake every day with my 2 sisters, but I cannot fly back again without my shift. My sisters have gone away, but I have been forced to stay behind. I entreat you to give me my shift back." "Don't worry, poor child," said the drummer. "I will willingly give it back to you." He took it out of his pocket and reached it to her in the dark. She snatched it up in haste and wanted to go away with it. "Stop a moment. Perhaps I can help you." "You can only help me by ascending the glass mountain, and indeed, if you were quite close to it, you could not ascend it." "When I want to do a thing, I always can do it," said the drummer. "I'm sorry for you, and I have no fear of anything, but I do not know which way leads to the glass mountain." "The road goes through the great forest in which the man-eaters live," she answered. "And more than that, I dare not tell you." And then he heard her wings as she flew away. By daybreak the drummer arose, buckled on his drums, and went without fear into the forest. After he had walked for a while without seeing any giants, he thought to himself, "I must waken up the sluggards," and he hung his drum before him, and beat such a roll that the birds flew out of the trees with loud cries. It was not long before a giant who had been lying sleeping among the grass rose up, and was as tall as a fir tree. "Wretch!" cried he, "what are you drumming here for, and waking me out of my best sleep?" "Well, I am drumming," he replied, "because I want to show the way to many thousands who are following me." "What do they want in my forest?" demanded the giant. "Well, they want to put an end to you, and cleanse the forest of such a monster as you." "Oh-ho!" said the giant. "I will trample you all to death like so many ants." "Do you think you can do anything against us?" said the drummer. "If you stoop to take hold of one, he will jump away and hide himself. But when you're lying down and sleeping, they will come forth from every thicket and creep up to you. Every one of them has a hammer of steel in his belt, and with that they will beat in your skull." The giant grew angry and thought, "If I meddle with the crafty folk, it might turn out badly for me. I can strangle wolves and bears, but I cannot protect myself from these earthworms. Listen, little fellow," said he, "go back again, and I will promise you that for the future I will leave you and your comrades in peace. And if there is anything else you wish for, tell me, for I am quite willing to do something to please you." "You have long legs," said the drummer, "and can run quicker than I. Carry me to the glass mountain, and I will give my followers a signal to go back, and they shall leave you in peace this time." "Come here, worm," said the giant. "Seat yourself on my left shoulder. I will carry you where you wish to be." The giant lifted him up, and the drummer began to beat his drum up aloft to his heart's delight. The giant thought, "That must be the signal for the other people to turn back." After a while, a second giant was standing in the road, who took the drummer from the first and stuck him in his buttonhole. The drummer laid hold of the button, which was as large as a dish, held on by it, and looked merrily around. Then they came to a third giant, who took him out of the buttonhole and set him on the rim of his hat. Up there the drummer walked backwards and forwards and looked over the trees, and when he perceived a mountain in the blue distance, he thought, "That must be the glass mountain." And so it was. The giant only made 2 more steps, and they reached the foot of the mountain, where the giant put him down. The drummer demanded to be put on the summit of the glass mountain, but the giant shook his head, growled something in his beard, and then went back into the forest. And now the poor drummer was standing before the mountain, which was as high as if 3 mountains were piled on each other, and at the same time as smooth as a looking-glass, and he did not know how to get up. He began to climb, but that was useless, for he always slipped back again. "If one was a bird now, thought he. But what was the good of wishing? No wings grew for him. Whilst he was standing thus, not knowing what to do, he saw not far from him 2 men who were struggling fiercely together. He went up to them and saw that they were disputing about a saddle which was lying on the ground before them, and which both of them wanted to have. "What fools you are," said he, "to quarrel about a saddle, when you have not a horse for it." "The saddle is worth fighting about," answered one of the men. "Whosoever sits on it and wishes himself in any place, even if it should turn out to be the very end of the earth, he gets there in the instant he has uttered the wish. The saddle belongs to us in common. It is my turn to ride on it, but the other man will not let me do it." "I will soon decide the quarrel," said the drummer, and he went to a short distance and stuck a white rod in the ground. Then he came back and said, "Now run to the goal, and whoever gets there first shall ride first." Both men set out at a trot, but hardly had they gone a couple of steps before the drummer swung himself on the saddle, wished himself on the glass mountain, and before anyone could turn around, he was there. On the top of the mountain was a plain. There stood an old stone house, and in front of the house lay a great fish pond, but behind it was a dark forest. He saw neither men nor animals. Everything was quiet. Only the wind rustled amongst the trees, and the clouds moved by quite close above his head. He went to the door and knocked. When he had knocked for the 3rd time, an old woman with a brown face and red eyes opened the door. She had spectacles on her long nose and looked sharply at him. Then she asked what he wanted. "Entrance, food, and a bed for the night," replied the drummer.
"That you shall have," said the old woman, "if you will perform 3 services in return."
"Oh, why not?" he answered. "I'm not afraid of any kind of work, however hard it may be." The old woman let him go in, and gave him some food and a good bed at night. The next morning, when he had slept his fill, she took a thimble from her wrinkled finger, reached it to the drummer, and said,
"Go to work now, and empty out the pond with this thimble. But you must have it done before night, and must have sought out all the fishes which are in the water, and laid them side by side, according to their kind and size."
"Well, that sure is strange work," said the drummer. But he went to the pond and began to empty it. He bailed the whole morning, but what can be done to a great lake with a thimble, even if he were to bail for 1,000 years? When it was noon, he thought, "It is all useless, and whether I work or not, it will come to the same thing." So he gave it up and sat down. Then came a maiden out of the house, who set a little basket with food before him, and said,
"What ails you, that you sit so sadly here?"
He looked at her, and saw that she was wondrously beautiful. "Ah," said he, "I cannot finish the first piece of work. How will it be with the others? I came forth to seek a king's daughter who is said to dwell here, but I have not found her, and I will go farther."
"Stay here," said the maiden. "I will help you out of your difficulty. You are tired. Lay your head in my lap and sleep. When you awake again, your work will be done."
The drummer did not need to be told that twice. As soon as his eyes were shut, she turned a wishing ring and said,
"Rise, water. Fishes come out."
Instantly, the water rose on high like a white mist and moved away with the other clouds, and the fishes sprang on the shore and laid themselves side by side, each according to his size and kind. When the drummer awoke, he saw with amazement that all was done. But the maiden said,
"One of the fish is not lying with those of its own kind, but quite alone. When the old woman comes tonight and sees that all she's demanded has been done, she will ask you, 'What is this fish lying alone for?' Then throw the fish into her face and say, 'This one shall be for you, old witch.'"
In the evening, when the witch came, and when she had put this question, he threw the fish in her face. She behaved as if she did not notice it, and said nothing, but looked at him with malicious eyes. Next morning she said,
"Yesterday it was too easy for you. I must give you harder work. Today you must hew down the whole of the forest, split the wood into logs, and pile them up, and everything must be finished by the evening."
She gave him an axe, a mallet, and 2 wedges, but the axe was made of lead, and the mallet and wedges were made of tin. When he began to cut, the edge of the axe was blunted, and the mallet and wedges were beaten out of shape. He did not know how to manage, but at midday the maiden came once more with his dinner and comforted him.
"Lay your head on my lap,"
said she,
"and sleep. When you awake, your work will be done."
She turned her wishing ring, and in an instant the whole forest fell down with a crash. The wood split and arranged itself in heaps, and it seemed just as if unseen giants were finishing the work. When he awoke, the maiden said,
"Do you see that the wood is piled up and arranged? One bough alone remains. But when the old woman comes this evening and asks you about that bough, give her a blow with it, and say, 'That is for you, you witch.'"
The old woman came.
"There, you see how easy the work was,"
said she.
"But for whom have you left that bough?"
"For you, you witch," he replied, and he gave her a blow with it. But she pretended not to feel it, laughed scornfully, and said,
"Early tomorrow morning you shall arrange all the wood in one heap. Set fire to it and burn it."
He rose at the break of day, and he began to pick up the wood. But how can a single man get a whole forest together? The work made no progress. The maiden, however, did not desert him in his need. She brought him his food at noon, and when he had eaten, he laid his head on her lap and went to sleep. When he awoke, the entire pile of wood was burning in one enormous flame, which stretched its tongues out into the sky.
"Listen to me," said the maiden. "When the witch comes, she will give you all kinds of orders. Do whatever she asks you without fear, and then she will not be able to get the better of you. But if you are afraid, the fire will lay hold of you and consume you. At last, when you have done everything, seize her with both of your hands and throw her into the midst of the fire."
The maiden departed, and the old woman came sneaking up to him.
"Oh, I am cold," said she, "but that is a fire that burns. It warms up my old bones and does me good. But I see a log lying there which won't burn. Bring it out for me. When you have done that, you are free, and you may go where you like. Now jump in."
The drummer did not reflect long. He sprang into the midst of the flames, but they did not hurt him, and could not even singe a hair off of his head. He carried the log out and laid it down. Hardly, however, had the wood touched the earth than it was transformed, and the beautiful maiden who had helped him in his need stood there before him, and by the silken and shining golden garments which she wore, he knew right well that she was the king's daughter. But the old woman laughed venomously and said,
"You think you have her safe, but you have not got her yet."
Just as she was about to fall on the maiden and take her away, the youth seized the old woman with both of his hands, raised her up on high, and threw her into the jaws of the fire, which closed over her as if it were delighted that an old witch was to be burnt. Then the king's daughter looked at the drummer, and when she saw that he was a handsome youth, and remembered how he had risked his life to deliver her, she gave him her hand and said,
"You have ventured everything for my sake, but I also will do everything for yours. Promise to be true to me, and you shall be my husband. We shall never want for riches. We shall have enough with what that witch has gathered together here."
She led him into the house where there were chests and coffers crammed with the old woman's treasures. The maiden left the gold and silver where it was, and took only the precious stones. She would not stay any longer on the glass mountain, so the drummer said to her, "Seat yourself by me on my saddle, and then we will fly down like birds."
"I do not like the old saddle," said she. "I need only turn my wishing ring, and we shall be at home."
"Very well, then," answered the drummer. "Then wish us in front of the town gate." In the twinkling of an eye they were there, but the drummer said, "I will just go to my parents and tell them the news. Wait for me outside here, and I shall soon be back."
"Ah," said the king's daughter, "I beg you to be careful. On your arrival, do not kiss your parents on the right cheek, or else you will forget everything, and I shall stay behind here outside, alone and deserted."
"How can I forget you?" said he, and promised her to come back very soon, and he gave his hand upon it. When he went into his father's house, he had changed so much that no one knew who he was, for the 3 days which had passed on the glass mountain had been 3 years. Then he made himself known, and his parents fell on his neck with joy, and his heart was so moved that he forgot what the maiden had said, and he kissed them on both cheeks. But when he had given them the kiss on the right cheek, every thought of the king's daughter vanished from him. He emptied out his pockets and laid handfuls of the largest jewels on the table. The parents had not the least idea what to do with the riches. Then the father built a magnificent castle, all surrounded by gardens, woods, and meadows, as if a prince were going to live in it, and when it was ready, the mother said,
"I have found a maiden for you, and the wedding shall be in 3 days."
The son was content to do as his parents desired. The poor king's daughter had stood for a long time outside the town, waiting for the return of the young man. When evening came, she said,
"He must certainly have kissed his parents on the right cheek, and he has forgotten me."
Her heart was full of sorrow. She wished herself into a solitary little hut in the forest, and would not return to her father's court. Every evening she went into the town and passed the young man's house. He often saw her, but he no longer knew her. At length, when she heard the people saying that the wedding will take place tomorrow, then she said,
"I will try if I can, and I will win back his heart."
On the first day of the wedding ceremonies, she turned her wishing ring and said,
"A dress as bright as the sun."
Instantly, the dress lay before her, and it was as bright as if it had been woven with real sunbeams. When all the guests were assembled, she entered the hall. Everyone was amazed at the beautiful dress, and the bride most of all. And as pretty dresses were the things she had most delight in, she went to the stranger and asked if she would sell it to her.
"Not for money,"
she answered,
"but if I may pass the first night outside of the door of the room where your betrothed sleeps, I will give it to you."
The bride could not overcome her desire and consented, but she mixed a sleeping draught with the wine her betrothed took that night, which made him fall into a deep sleep. When all had become quiet, the king's daughter crouched down by the door of the bedroom, opened it just a little, and cried,
Drummer, drummer, I pray thee hear. Hast thou forgotten thou heldest me dear? That on the glass mountain we sat hour by hour, that I rescued thy life from the witch's power? Didst thou not plight thy troth to me? Drummer, drummer, hearken to me.
But all was in vain. The drummer did not awake, and when morning dawned, the king's daughter was forced to go back again as she came. On the second evening, she turned her wishing ring and said,
A dress as silvery as the moon.
When she appeared at the feast in the dress which was as soft as moonbeams, it again excited the desire of the bride, and the king's daughter gave it to her for permission to pass the second night also outside the door of the bedroom. Then, in the stillness of the night, she cried,
Drummer, drummer, I pray thee hear. Hast thou forgotten thy heldest me dear? That on the glass mountain we sat hour by hour, that I rescued thy life from the witch's power? Didst thou not plight thy troth to me? Drummer, drummer, hearken to me.
But the drummer, who was stupefied with the sleeping draught, could not be aroused. Sadly, next morning she went back to her hut in the forest. But the people in the house had heard the lamentation of the stranger maiden and told the bridegroom about it. They told him also that it was impossible that he could hear anything of it because the maiden he was going to marry had poured a sleeping draught into his wine. On the third evening, the king's daughter turned her wishing ring and said,
A dress glittering like the stars.
When she showed herself therein at the feast, the bride was quite beside herself with the splendor of the dress, which far surpassed the others, and she said,
I must and will have it.
The maiden gave it as she had given the others for permission to spend the night outside the bridegroom's door. The bridegroom, however, did not drink the wine which was handed to him before he went to bed, but poured it behind the bed, and when everything was quiet, he heard a sweet voice which called to him,
Drummer, drummer, I pray thee hear. Hast thou forgotten thou held me dear? That on the glass mountain we sat hour by hour, that I rescued thy life from the witch's power? Didst thou not plight thy troth to me? Drummer, drummer, hearken to me.
Suddenly his memory returned to him.
Ah, cried he, how can I have acted so unfaithfully? But the kiss which in the joy of my heart I gave my parents on the right cheek, that is to blame for it all. That is what stupefied me.
He sprang up, took the king's daughter by the hand, and led her to his parents' bed.
This is my true bride, said he. If I marry the other, I shall do a great wrong.
The parents, when they heard how everything had happened, gave their consent. Then the lights in the hall were lighted again, drums and trumpets were brought, friends and relations were invited to come, and the real wedding was solemnized with great rejoicing. The first bride received the beautiful dresses as a compensation, and declared herself satisfied. The Crystal Ball. There was once an enchantress who had 3 sons who loved each other as brothers, but the old woman did not trust them and thought that they wanted to steal her power from her. So she changed the eldest son into an eagle, which was forced to dwell in the Rocky Mountains and was often seen flying in great circles in the sky. The second she changed into a whale, which lived in the deep sea, and all that was seen of it was that it sometimes spouted up a great jet of water in the air. Each of them bore his human form for only 2 hours daily. The third son, who was afraid she might change him into a raging wild beast, a bear perhaps, or a wolf, went secretly away. He had heard that a king's daughter who was bewitched was imprisoned in a castle of the Golden Sun and was waiting to be set free. Those, however, who tried to free her risked their lives. 23 youths had already died a miserable death, and now only one other might make the attempt, after which no more must come. And as his heart was without fear, he made up his mind to seek out the castle of the Golden Sun. He had already traveled about for a long time without being able to find it, when he came by chance into a great forest and did not know the way out of it. All at once he saw in the distance 2 giants who made a sign to him with their hands, and when he came to them they said,
"We are quarreling about a cap, and which of us it is to belong to, and we are equally strong. Neither of us can get the better of the other. The small men are more clever than we are, so we will leave the decision to you."
"How can you dispute about an old cap?" said the youth.
"You do not know what properties it has. It is a wishing cap. Whosoever puts it on can wish himself away wherever he likes, and in an instant he will be there."
"Give me the cap," said the youth. "I will go a short distance off, and when I call you, you must run a race, and the cap shall belong to the one who gets first to me."
He put it on and went away, and then thought of the king's daughter, forgot about the giants, and walked continually onward. At length he sighed from the very bottom of his heart and cried,
If I were but at the castle of the Golden Sun."
And hardly had the words passed his lips than he was standing on a high mountain before the gate of the castle. He entered and went through all the rooms until in the last he found the king's daughter. But how shocked he was when he saw her. She had an ashen-gray face full of wrinkles, bleary eyes, and red hair.
"Are you the king's daughter, whose beauty the whole world praises?" cried he.
She answered, "This is not my form. Human eyes can only see me in this state of ugliness. But that you may know what I am like, look in the mirror. It does not let itself be misled. It will show you my image as it is in truth."
She gave him the mirror in his hand, and he saw therein the likeness of the most beautiful maiden on earth, and he also saw, too, how the tears were rolling down her cheeks with grief. Then said he,
"How can you be set free? I fear no danger."
She said,
"He who gets the crystal ball and holds it before the enchanter will destroy his power with it, and I shall resume my true shape."
She added,
"So many have already gone to meet death for this, and you are so young. I grieve that you should encounter such great danger."
"Nothing can keep me from doing it," said he. "But tell me what I must do."
"You shall know everything," said the king's daughter. "When you descend the mountain on which the castle stands, a wild boar will stand below by a spring, and you must fight with it. And if you have the luck to kill it, a fiery bird will spring out of it, which bears in its body a red-hot egg, and in the egg the crystal ball lies as its yolk. The bird, however, will not let the egg fall until forced to do so, and if it falls on the ground, it will flame up and burn everything that is near, and even the egg itself will melt, and with it the crystal ball, and then your trouble will have been in vain."
The youth went down to the spring where the bull snorted and bellowed at him. After a long struggle, he plunged his sword in the animal's body, and it fell down. Instantly, a fiery bird arose from it and was about to fly away, but the young man's brother, the eagle, who was passing between the clouds, swooped down, hunted it away to the sea, and struck it with his beak until, in its extremity, it let the egg fall. The egg, however, did not fall into the sea, but on a fisherman's hut, which stood on the shore, and the hut began at once to smoke, and was about to break out in flames. Then arose in the sea waves as high as a house, which streamed over the hut and subdued the fire. The other brother, the whale, had come swimming to them, and had driven the water up on high. When the fire was extinguished, the youth sought for the egg and happily found it. It was not yet melted, but the shell was broken by being so suddenly cooled with the water, and he could take out the crystal ball unhurt. When the youth went to the enchanter and held it before him, the latter said,
"My power is destroyed, and from this time forth you are the king of the castle of the Golden Sun. With this you can likewise give back to your brothers their human form."
Then the youth hastened to the king's daughter, and when he entered the room, she was standing there in the full splendor of her beauty, and joyfully they exchanged rings with each other. Old Rink Rank. There was once upon a time a king who had a daughter, and he caused a glass mountain to be made, and said that whosoever could cross to the other side of it without falling should have his daughter to wife. Then there was one who loved the king's daughter, and he asked the king if he might have her.
"Yes," said the king, "if you can cross the mountain without falling, you shall have her."
And the princess said she would go over it with him, and would hold him if he were about to fall. So they set out together to go over it, and when they were halfway up, the princess slipped and fell, and the glass mountain opened and shut her up inside of it, and her betrothed could not see where she had gone, for the mountain closed immediately. Then he wept and lamented much, and the king was miserable too, and ordered the mountain to be broken up where she had been lost, and he thought that he would be able to get her out again, but they could not find the place into which she had fallen. Meanwhile, the king's daughter had fallen quite deep down into the earth into a great cave. An old fellow with a very long gray beard came to meet her, and told her that if she would be his servant and do everything he bade her, she might live, and if not, he would kill her. So she did all he bade her. In the mornings he took his ladder out of his pocket and set it up against the mountain and climbed to the top by its help, and then he drew the ladder after him. The princess had to cook his dinner, make his bed, and do all of his work, and when he came home again, he always brought with him a heap of gold and silver. When she had lived with him for many years and had grown quite old, he called her Mother Mansrot, and she had to call him Old Rink Rank. Then, once when he was out, and she had made his bed and washed his dishes, she shut the doors and windows all fast, and there was one little window through which the light shone in, and this she left open. When Old Rink Rank came home, he knocked at his door and cried, "Mother Mansrot, open the door for me."
"No," said she, "Old Rink Rank, I will not open the door for you."
Then he said,
"Here I stand, I, poor Rink Rank, on my 17 long shanks, on my weary worn-out foot. Wash my dishes, Mother Mansrot." "I have washed your dishes already," said she.
Then again he said,
"Here I stand, poor Rink Rank, on my 17 long shanks, on my weary worn-out foot. Make my bed, Mother Mansrot." "I have made your bed already," said she.
Then again he said,
"Here I stand, poor Rink Rank, on my 17 long shanks, on my weary worn-out foot. Open the door, Mother Mansrot."
Then he ran all around his house and saw that the little window was open and thought,
"I will look in and see what she can be about, and why she will not open the door for me."
He tried to peep in, but could not get his head through because of his long beard. So first he put his beard through the open window, but just as he had got it through, Mother Mansrot came by and pulled the window down with a cord which he had tied to it, and his beard was shut fast in it. Then he began to cry most piteously, for it hurt him very much, and to entreat her to release him again. But she said she would not until he gave her the ladder with which he ascended the mountain. Then, whether he would or not, he had to tell her where the ladder was, and she fastened a very long ribbon to the window, and then she set up the ladder and ascended the mountain, and when she was at the top of it, she opened the window. She went to her father and told him all that had happened to her. The king rejoiced greatly, and her betrothed was still there, and they went and dug up the mountain, and found old Rink Rank inside of it with all of his gold and silver. Then the king had old Rink Rank put to death, and took all of his gold and silver. The princess married her betrothed, and lived right happily in great magnificence and joy. Maid Maleen. There was once a king who had a son who asked in marriage of the daughter of a mighty king. She was called Maid Maleen and was very beautiful. As her father wished to give her to another, the prince was rejected, but as they both loved each other with all of their hearts, they would not give each other up, and Maid Maleen said to the father,
"I can and will take no other for my husband."
Then the king flew into a passion and ordered a dark tower to be built, into which no ray of sunlight or moonlight should enter. When it was finished, he said, "Therein you shall be imprisoned for 7 years, and then I will come and see if your perverse spirit is broken." Meat and drink for the 7 years were carried into the tower, and then she and her maid-in-waiting were let into it and walled up, and thus cut off from the sky and from the earth. There they sat in the darkness, and knew not when day or night began. The king's son often went around to the round tower, and called their names, but no sound from without pierced through the thick walls. What else could they do but lament and complain? Meanwhile the time passed, and by the decline of food and drink they knew that the 7 years were coming to an end. They thought the moment of their deliverance was come, but no stroke of the hammer was heard, no stone fell out of the wall, and it seemed to Maid Maleen that her father had forgotten her. As they had food only for a short time longer, and saw a miserable death awaiting them, Maid Maleen said,
"We must try our last chance, and see if we can break through the wall."
She took the bread knife, and picked and bored at the mortar of the stone. And when she was tired, the waiting maid took her turn. With great labor, they succeeded in getting out the stone, and then a second, and a third, and when 3 days were over, the first ray of light fell on their darkness, and at last the opening was so large that they could look out. The sky was blue, and a fresh breeze played on their faces, but how melancholy everything looked all around. Her father's castle lay in ruins. The town and the villages were, so far as they could be seen, destroyed by fire. The fields far and wide laid to waste, and no human being was visible. When the opening in the wall was large enough for them to slip through, the waiting maid sprang down first, and then Maid Maleen followed. But where were they to go? The enemy had ravaged the whole kingdom, driven away the king, and slain all the inhabitants. They wandered forth to seek another country, but nowhere did they find a shelter or a human being that would give them a mouthful of bread, and their need was so great that they were forced to appease their hunger with nettles. When after long journeying, they came into another country, they tried to get work everywhere, but wherever they knocked they were turned away, and no one would have pity on them. At last they arrived in a large city and went to the royal palace. There they also were ordered to go away, but at last the cook said that they might stay in the kitchen and be scullions. The son of the king in whose kingdom they were, however, was the very man who had been betrothed to Maid Maleen. His father had chosen another bride for him, whose face was as ugly as her heart was wicked. The wedding was fixed, and the maiden had already arrived, but because of her great ugliness, she shut herself in her room, and allowed no one to see her, and Maid Maleen had to take her meals from the kitchen. When the day came for the bride and the bridegroom to go to the church, she was ashamed of her ugliness, and afraid that if she showed herself in the streets, she would be mocked and laughed at by the people. Then said she to Maid Maleen,
"A great piece of luck has befallen you. I have sprained my foot, and cannot walk well enough through the streets.
You shall put on the wedding dress and take my place. A greater honor than that you cannot have."
Maid Maleen, however, refused it and said,
"I wish for no honor which is not suitable for me."
It was in vain, too, that the bride offered her gold. At last she said angrily,
"If you do not obey me, it shall cost you your life. I have to but speak the word, and your head will lie at your feet."
At this, Maid Maleen was forced to obey, and she put on the bride's magnificent clothes and all of her jewels. When she entered the royal hall, everyone was amazed at her great beauty, and the king said to his son,
"This is the bride whom I have chose for you, and whom you must lead to church."
The bridegroom was astonished and thought,
"She is like my Maid Maleen, and I should believe that it was she herself, but she has long been shut up in the tower, or even dead."
He took her by the hand and led her to church. On the way was a nettle plant, and she said,
"O nettle plant, little nettle plant, what dost thou here alone? I have known the time when I ate thee unboiled, when I ate thee unroasted." "What are you saying?"
asked the king's son.
"Nothing,"
she replied.
"I was only thinking of Maid Maleen."
He was surprised that she knew about her, but he kept his silence. When they came to the footplank into the churchyard, she said,
"Footbridge, do not break. I am not the true bride." "What are you saying there?" asked the king's son. "Nothing," she replied. "I was only thinking of Maid Maleen." "Do you know Maid Maleen?" "No," she answered. "How should I know her? I have only heard of her."
When they came to the church door, she said once more,
"Church door, break not. I am not the true bride." "What are you saying there?" asked he. "Oh, I was only thinking of Maid Maleen."
And then he took out a precious chain, put it around her neck, and fastened the clasp. Thereupon they entered the church, and the priest joined their hands together before the altar and married them. He led her home, but she did not speak a single word the whole way. When they got back to the royal palace, she hurried into the bride's chamber, put off the magnificent clothes and the jewels, dressed herself in her gray gown, and kept nothing but the jewel on her neck, which she had received from the bridegroom. When the night came, and the bride was to be led into the prince's apartment, she let her veil fall over her face, that he might not observe the deception. As soon as everyone had gone away, he said to her,
"What did you say to the nettle plant which was growing by the wayside?" "To which nettle plant?" asked she. "I don't talk to the nettle plants." "If you did not do it, then you are not the true bride," said he.
So she bethought herself and said,
"I must go unto my maid, who keeps my thoughts for me."
She went out and sought Maid Maleen.
"Girl, what have you been saying to the nettle?" "I said nothing but, O nettle plant, little nettle plant, what dost thou here alone? I have known the time when I ate thee unboiled, and I ate thee unroasted."
The bride ran back into the chamber and said,
"I know now what I said to the nettle."
And she repeated the words which she had just heard.
"But what did you say to the footbridge when we went over it?"
asked the king's son.
"To the footbridge?"
she answered.
"I don't talk to footbridges." "Oh, then you are not the true bride."
She again said,
"I must go unto my maid, who keeps my thoughts for me."
She ran out and scolded Maid Maleen.
"Girl, what did you say to the footbridge?" "I said nothing but, footbridge, do not break. I am not the true bride." "That cost you your life," cried the bride,
but she hurried into the room and said,
"I know now what I said to the footbridge."
And she repeated the words.
"All right, but what did you say to the church door?" "To the church door?" she replied. "I don't talk to church doors."
Then you are not the true bride.
She left the room, went and scolded Maid Maleen, and said,
Girl, what did you say to the church door?
I said nothing but, Church door, break not, I am not the true bride.
That will break your neck for you,
cried the bride, and flew into a terrible passion, but she hastened back into the room and said,
I know now what I said to the church door.
And she repeated the words.
But where have you the jewel which I gave you at the church door? What jewel?
She answered.
You did not give me any jewel.
Oh, right. I myself put it round your neck, and I myself fastened it. And if you do not know that, then you are not the true bride. He drew the veil from her face, and when he saw her immeasurable ugliness, he sprang back terrified and said, How do you come here? Who are you?
I am your betrothed bride, but because I feared lest the people should mock me when they saw me out of doors, I commanded the scullery maid to dress herself in my clothes and to go to the church instead of me.
Where is this girl? Said he. I want to see her. Go and bring her here.
She went out and told the servants that the scullery maid was an impostor, and that they were to take her out into the courtyard and strike off her head. The servants laid hold of Maid Maleen and wanted to drag her out, but she screamed so loudly for help that the king's son heard her voice, hurried out of his chamber, and ordered them to set the maiden free instantly. Lights were brought, and then he saw on her neck the gold chain which he had given her at the church door.
You are the true bride, said he, who went with me to the church. Come with me now into my room.
When they were both alone, he said,
On the way to the church, you did name Maid Maleen, who was my betrothed bride. If I could believe it possible, I should think she was standing before me. You're like her in every respect.
She answered,
I am Maid Maleen, who for your sake was imprisoned 7 years in the darkness, who suffered hunger and thirst, and who has lived so long in want and poverty. Today, however, the sun is shining once more. I was married to you in the church, and I am your lawful wife.
Then they kissed each other and were happy all the days of their lives. The false bride was rewarded for what she had done by having her head cut off. The tower in which Maid Maleen had been imprisoned remained standing for a long time, and when the children passed by it, they sang,
King Clang Gloria, who sits within the tower, a king's daughter, she sits within. A sight of her I cannot win. The wall it will not break, the stone cannot be pierced. Little Hans, with your coat so gay, follow me, fast as you may.
The Rose. There was once a poor woman who had 2 children. The youngest had to go every day into the forest to fetch wood. Once, when she had gone a long way to seek it, a little child who was quite strong came and helped her industriously to pick up the wood and carry it home, and then before a moment had passed, the strange child disappeared. The child told her mother this, but at first she would not believe it. At length she brought a rose home and told her mother that the beautiful child had given her this rose and had told her that when it was in full bloom, he would return. The mother put the rose in water. One morning, her child could not get out of bed. The mother went to the bed and found her dead, but she lay looking very happy. On the same morning, the rose was in full bloom. Saint Joseph in the Forest.
There was once on a time a mother who had 3 daughters, the eldest of whom was rude and wicked, the second much better, although she had her faults, but the youngest was a pious, good child. The mother, however, was so strange that it was just the eldest daughter whom she most loved, and she could not bear the youngest. On this account, she often sent the poor girl out into the great forest in order to get rid of her, for she thought she would lose herself and never come back again. But the guardian angel, which every good child has, did not forsake her, but always brought her into the right path once again. Once, however, the guardian angel behaved as if he were not there, and the child could not find her way out of the forest again. She walked on constantly until evening came, and then she saw a tiny light burning in the distance. She ran to it at once and came to a little hut. She knocked, the door opened, and she came to the second door, where she knocked again. An old man who had a snow-white beard and looked venerable opened it for her, and he was no other than Saint Joseph. He said quite kindly, "Come in, dear child. Seat yourself on my little chair by the fire and warm yourself. I will fetch you a clear water if you are thirsty, but here in the forest I have nothing for you to eat but a couple of little roots, which you must first scrape and boil." Saint Joseph gave her the roots. The girl scraped them clean. Then she brought a piece of pancake and the bread that her mother had given her to take with her, mixed all together in a pan, and cooked herself a thick soup. When it was ready, Saint Joseph said, "I am so hungry. Give me some of your food." The child was quite willing and gave him more than she kept for herself, but God's blessing was with her, so that she was satisfied. When they had eaten, Saint Joseph said, "Now we will go to bed. I have, however, only one bed. Lay yourself in it. I will lie on the ground on the straw."
"No," answered she. "Stay in your own bed. The straw is soft enough for me."
But Saint Joseph took the child in his arms and carried her into the little bed, and there she said her prayers and fell asleep. Next morning when she awoke, she wanted to say good morning to Saint Joseph, but she did not see him. Then she got up and looked for him, but could not find him anywhere. At last she perceived, behind the door, a bag with money so heavy that she could just carry it, and on it was written that it was for the child who had slept there that night. On this, she took the bag, bounded away with it, and got safely to her mother, and as she gave her mother all the money, she could not help being satisfied with her. The next day, the second child also took a fancy to go into the forest. Her mother gave her a much larger piece of pancake and bread. It happened with her just as with the first child. In the evening she came to Saint Joseph's little hut, who gave her roots for a thick soup. When it was ready, he likewise said to her, "I am so hungry. Give me some of your food." Then the child said,
"You may have your share."
Afterwards, when Saint Joseph offered her his bed and wanted to lie on a straw, she replied,
"No, lie down in the bed. There's plenty of room for both of us."
Saint Joseph took her in his arms and put her in the bed, and laid himself on the straw. In the morning, when the child awoke and looked for Saint Joseph, he had vanished, but behind the door she found a little sack of money that was about as long as a hand, and on it was written that it was for the child who had slept there last night. So she took the little bag out and ran home with it, and took it to her mother, but she secretly kept 2 pieces for herself. The eldest daughter by this time had grown inquisitive, and the next morning also insisted on going out into the forest. Her mother gave her pancakes, as many as she wanted, and bread and cheese as well. In the evening she found Saint Joseph in his little hut, just as the 2 others had found him. When the soup was ready, and Saint Joseph said, "I am so hungry. Give me some of the food," the girl answered,
"Wait until I'm satisfied, and if there's anything left for you, you shall have it."
But she ate nearly the whole of it, and Saint Joseph had to scrape the dish. Afterwards, The good old man offered her his bed and wanted to lie on the straw. She took it without making any opposition, laid herself down in the little bed, and left the hard straw to the white-haired man. Next morning when she awoke, St. Joseph was not to be found, but she did not trouble herself about that. She looked behind the door for the money bag. She fancied something was lying on the ground, but as she could not very well distinguish what it was, she stooped down so that she touched it with her nose, where it remained hanging. And when she got up again, she saw, to her horror, that it was a second nose, which was hanging fast to her own. Then she began to scream and howl, but that did no good. She always had to look at her nose, for it stretched out so far. Then she ran out and screamed without stopping until she met St. Joseph, at whose feet she fell and begged until, out of pity, he took the nose off of her again, and even gave her 2 farthings. When she got home, her mother was standing before the door and asked,
"What have you had given to you?"
Then she lied and said,
"A great bag of money, but I have lost it on the way." "Lost it?" cried the mother. "Oh, but we will soon find it again,"
and took her by the hand and wanted to seek it with her. At first she began to cry and did not wish to go, but at last she went. On the way, however, so many lizards and snakes broke loose on the both of them that they did not know how to save themselves. At last they stung the wicked child to death, and then they stung the mother in the foot, just because she had not brought the daughter up better. The 12 Apostles. 300 years before the birth of the Lord Christ, there lived a mother who had 12 sons, but was so poor and needy that she no longer knew how she was to keep them alive. She prayed to God daily that he would grant her that all of her sons might be on the earth with the Redeemer who was promised. When her necessity became still greater, she sent one of them after the other out into the world to seek their bread. The eldest was called Peter, and he went out and had already walked a long way, a whole day's journey, when he came into a great forest. He sought for a way out, but could find none, and went farther and farther astray, and at the same time felt such a great hunger that he could scarcely stand. At length he became so weak that he was forced to lie down, and he believed death to be at hand. Suddenly there stood beside him a small boy who shone with brightness, and was as beautiful and kind as an angel. The child smote his little hands together, until Peter was forced to look up and see him. Then the child said,
"Why are you sitting there in such trouble?"
"Alas," answered Peter, "I am going about the world seeking bread, that I may yet see the dear Savior who was promised. That is my greatest desire." The child said,
"Come with me, and your wish shall be fulfilled."
He took Peter by the hand and led him between some cliffs to a great cavern. When they entered it, everything was shining with gold, silver, and crystal, and in the midst of it 12 cradles were standing side by side. Then said the little angel,
"Lie down in the first, and sleep a while. I will rock you."
Peter did so, and the angel sang to him and rocked him until he was asleep. And when he was asleep, the second brother came also, guided thither by his guardian angel, and he was rocked to sleep like the first, and thus came the others, one after the other, until all 12 lay there sleeping in the golden cradles. They slept, however, 300 years, until the night when the Savior of the world was born. Then they awoke, and were with him on the earth, and they were called the 12 Apostles. Poverty and humility lead to heaven. There was once a king's son who went out into the world, and he was full of thought and sad. He looked up at the sky, which was so beautifully pure and blue. Then he sighed and said, "How well must all be with one up there in heaven." Then he saw a poor gray-haired man who was coming along the road towards him, and he spoke to him and asked, "How can I get to heaven?" The man answered, "By poverty and humility. Put on my ragged clothes, wander about the world for 7 years, and get to know what misery truly is. Take no money, but if you are hungry, ask compassionate hearts for a bit of bread. In this way, you will reach heaven." Then the king's son took off his magnificent coat and wore in its place the beggar's garment, went out into the wide world, and suffered great misery. He took nothing but a little food, said nothing, but prayed to the Lord to take him into his heaven. When the 7 years were over, he returned to his father's palace, but no one recognized him. He said to the servants, "Go and tell my parents that I have come back again." But the servants did not believe it, and laughed and left him standing there. Then said he, "Go and tell it to my brothers that they may come down, for I should so like to see them again." The servants would not do that either, but at last one of them went and told it to the king's children, but these did not believe it, and did not trouble themselves about it. Then he wrote a letter to his mother, and described to her all of his misery, but he did not say that he was her son. So out of pity, the queen had a place under the stairs assigned to him, and food taken to him daily by 2 servants. But one of them was ill-natured and said, "Why should the beggar have the good food?" and kept it for himself, or gave it to the dogs, and he took the weak, wasted-away beggar, nothing but water. The other, however, was honest, and took the beggar what was sent to him. It was little, but he could live on it for a while, and all the time he was quite patient, but he grew continually weaker. As his illness increased, he desired to receive the last sacrament. When the Mass was being celebrated, all the bells in the town and neighborhood began to ring of their own accord. After Mass, the priest went to the poor man under the stairs, and there he lay, dead. In one hand he had a rose, in the other a lily, and beside him was a paper on which was written his history. When he was buried, a rose grew on one side of his grave, and a lily on the other. God's food. There were once upon a time 2 sisters, one of whom had no children and was rich, and the other had 5 and was a widow, and so poor that she no longer had food enough to satisfy herself and her children. In her need, therefore, she went to her sister and said,
"My children and I are suffering the greatest hunger. You are rich. Please give me a mouthful of bread."
The very rich sister was as hard as a stone and said,
"I myself have nothing in the house,"
and drove away the poor creature with harsh words. After some time, the husband of the rich sister came home and was just going to cut himself a piece of bread, but when he made the first cut into the loaf, out flowed red blood. When the woman saw that, she was terrified and told him what had occurred. He hurried away to help the widow and her children, but when he entered her room, he found her praying. She had her 2 youngest children in her arms, and the 3 eldest were lying dead. He offered her food, but she answered,
"For earthly food we have no longer any desire. God has already satisfied the hunger of 3 of us, and he will hearken to our supplications likewise."
Scarcely had she uttered these words than the 2 little ones drew their last breath, whereupon her heart broke, and she also sank down dead. The 3 Green Twigs. There was once upon a time a hermit who lived in the forest at the foot of a mountain and passed his time in prayer and good works, and every evening he carried, to the glory of God, 2 pails of water up the mountain. Many a beast drank of it, and many a plant was refreshed by it, for on the heights above a strong wind blew continually, which dried the air and the ground, and the wild birds which dread mankind wheel about there, and with their sharp eyes search for a drink. And because the hermit was so pious, an angel of God, visible to his eyes, went up with him, counted his steps, and when the work was completed, brought him his food, even as the prophet of the old was by God's command fed by the raven. When the hermit in his piety had already reached a great age, it happened that he once saw from afar a poor sinner being taken to the gallows. He said carelessly to himself, "There, that one is getting his deserts." In the evening, when he was carrying the water up the mountain, the angel who usually accompanied him did not appear, and also brought him no food. Then he was terrified, and searched his heart, and tried to think how he could have sinned, as God was so angry, but he could not discover it. Then he neither ate nor drank, threw himself down on the ground, and prayed day and night. And as he was one day thus bitterly weeping in the forest, he heard a little bird singing beautifully and delightfully, and then he was still more troubled and said, "How joyously you sing! The Lord is not angry with you. Ah, if you could but tell me how I can have offended him, that I might do penance, and then my heart would also be glad again." Then the bird began to speak and said,
"You have done injustice in that you have condemned a poor sinner who was being led to the gallows, and for that the Lord is angry with you. He alone sits in judgment. However, if you will do penance and repent your sins, he will forgive you."
Then the angel stood beside him with a dry branch in his hand and said, "You shall carry this dry branch until 3 green twigs sprout out of it, but at night, when you will sleep, you shall lay it under your head. You shall beg your bread from door to door, and not tarry more than 1 night in the same house. That is the penance which the Lord lays on you." Then the hermit took the piece of wood, and he went back into the world, which he had not seen for so long. He ate and drank nothing but what was given him at the doors. Many petitions, however, were not listened to, and many doors remained shut to him, so that he often did not get a crumb of bread. Once, when he had gone from door to door from morning till night, and no one had given him anything, and no one would shelter him for the night, he went forth into a forest, and at last found a cave which someone had made, and an old woman was sitting in it. Then said he, good woman, keep me with you in your house for this night." But she said,
"No, I dare not, even if I wished. I have 3 sons who are wicked and wild. If they come home from their robbing expedition and find you, they would kill us both."
The hermit said, "Let me stay. They will do no injury either to you or to me." And the old woman was compassionate, and let herself be persuaded. Then the man lay down beneath the stairs, and put the bit of wood under his head. When the old woman saw him do that, she asked the reason of it, on which he told her that he carried the bit of wood about him for a penance, and used it at night for a pillow, and that he had offended the Lord, because when he had seen a poor sinner on the way to the gallows, he had said he was getting his deserts. Then the woman began to weep and cried,
"If the Lord punishes 1 single word, how will it fare with my sons when they appear before him in judgment?"
At midnight, The robbers came home and blustered and stormed. They made a fire, and when it had lighted up the cave and they saw a man lying under the stairs, they fell in a rage and cried to their mother, "Who is this man? Have we not forbidden anyone whomsoever to be taken in?" Then said the mother,
"Let him alone. It is a poor sinner who is expiating his crime."
The robbers asked, "What has he done?" Old man, cried they, "tell us your sins." The old man raised himself and told them how he, by one single word, had so sinned that God was angry with him, and how he was now expiating this crime. The robbers were so powerfully touched in their hearts by this story that they were shocked with their life up to this time, reflected, and began with hearty repentance to do penance for it. The hermit, after he had converted the 3 sinners, lay down to sleep again under the stairs. In the morning, however, they found him dead, and out of the dry wood on which his head lay, 3 green twigs had grown up on high. Thus, the Lord had once more received him into his favor. The Aged Mother. In a large town there was an old woman who sat in the evening alone in her room, thinking how she had lost first her husband, then both of her children, then one by one all of her relatives, and at length, that very day, her last friend, and now she was quite alone and desolate. She was very sad at heart, and heaviest of all of her losses to her was that of her sons, and in her pain she blamed God for it. She was still sitting lost in thought, when all at once she heard the bells ringing for early prayer. She was surprised that she had thus, in her sorrow, watched through the whole night, and lighted her lantern and went to the church. It was already lighted up when she arrived, but not as it usually was with wax candles, but with a dim light. It was also crowded already with people, and all of the seats were filled. And when the woman got to her usual place, it was also not empty, but the whole bench was entirely full. And when she looked at all the people, they were none other than her dead relatives, who were sitting there in their old-fashioned garments, but with pale faces. They neither spoke nor sang, but a soft humming and whispering was heard all over the church. Then an aunt of hers stood up, stepped forward, and said to the poor old woman,
"Look there beside the altar, and you will see your sons."
The old woman looked there, and saw her 2 children, one hanging on the gallows, the other bound to the wheel. Then said the aunt,
"Behold, so would it have been with them if they had lived, and if the good God had not taken them to himself when they were innocent children."
The old woman went trembling home, and on her knees thanked God for having dealt with her more kindly than she had been able to understand. And then, on the 3rd day, she lay down and died. The Hazel Branch. One afternoon, the Christ child had laid himself in his cradle bed and had fallen asleep. Then his mother came to him, looked at him full of gladness, and said,
"Have you laid yourself down to sleep, my child? Sleep sweetly, and in the meantime I will go into the wood and fetch you a handful of strawberries, for I know that you will be pleased with them when you awake."
In the wood outside, she found a spot with the most beautiful strawberries, but as she was stooping to gather one, an adder sprang up out of the grass. She was alarmed, left the strawberries where they were, and hastened away. The adder darted after her, but Our Lady, as you can readily understand, knew what it was best to do. She hid herself behind a hazel bush and stood there until the adder had crept away again. Then she gathered the strawberries, and as she set out on her way home, she said,
"As the hazel bush has been my protection this time, it shall in future protect others also."
Therefore, from the most remote times, a green hazel branch has been the safest protection against adders, snakes, and everything else which creeps on the earth. The straw, the coal, and the bean. In a village dwelt a poor old woman who had gathered together a dish of beans and wanted to cook them. So she made a fire on her hearth, and that it might burn the quicker, she lighted it with a handful of straw. When she was emptying the beans into the pan, one dropped without her observing it and lay on the ground beside the straw, and soon afterwards a burning coal from the fire leapt down to the dew. Then the straw began and said, "Dear friends, from whence do you come here?" The coal replied, "I fortunately sprang out of the fire, and if I had not escaped by sheer force, my death would have been certain. I should have been burnt to ashes." The bean said, "I too have escaped with a whole skin, but if the old woman had gotten me into the pan, I should have been made into broth without any mercy, just like my comrades." "And would a better fate have fallen to my lot?" said the straw. "The old woman has destroyed all of my brethren in fire and smoke. She seized 60 of them at once and took their lives. I luckily slipped through her fingers." "But what are we to do now?" said the coal. "I think," answered the bean, "that as we have so fortunately escaped death, we should keep together like good companions, and lest a new mischance should overtake us here, we should go away together and repair to a foreign country." The proposition pleased the two others, and they set out on their way together. Soon, however, they came to a little brook, and as there was no bridge or foot plank, they did not know how they were to get over it. The straw hit on a good idea and said, "I will lay myself straight across, and then you can walk over on me as a bridge." The straw therefore stretched itself from one bank to the other, and the coal, who was of an impetuous disposition, tripped quite boldly on the newly built bridge. But when he had reached the middle and heard the water rushing beneath him, he was, after all, afraid, and stood still and ventured no further. The straw, however, began to burn, broke in 2 pieces, and fell into the stream. The coal slipped after him, hissed when he got into the water, and breathed his last. The bean, who had prudently stayed behind on the shore, could not but laugh at the event, was unable to stop, and laughed so heartily that he burst. It would have been all over with him likewise, if, by good fortune, a tailor who was traveling in search of work had not sat down to rest by the brook. As he had a compassionate heart, he pulled out his needle and thread, and sewed him together. The bean thanked him most prettily, but as the tailor used black thread, all beans since then have had a black seam. And there we are, faithful listeners, another installment of Grimm's Fairy Tales. As always, we thank you for joining us. We thank you for your time, and we thank you for being here. We look forward to sharing time again with you for the next installment. Until then, sweet dreams.